Hi everyone, this is Tanya, and before I start off explaining my explanation portion of my UDL lesson plan, I would like to go over my content standard, which is 12.4.3. My learning objective is scholars will be able to identify their current representatives in the legislative branch of the national government through diagramming, Google search, or a set of flashcards with a minimum of 10 representatives. Okay, jumping right into the explanation portion of my UDL lesson plan. Overall, my partner and I wanted to make this section into a 20-minute discussion. The transition into this explanation part, or the E part of the lesson plan, would be where teacher A would start off by saying, with a show of hands, who can tell me how many representatives are in the legislative branch? And then, of course, students will raise their hands, and teacher A calls on a student. For this example, we are using teacher A and teacher B. We're not using our names because we're still not sure who's going to do what part, but we did throw in some student names just for the script portion of it to make it a little bit more creative. So with that being said, teacher A calls on a student, and for example, this student is Tommy. So Tommy answers, there are 453 representatives. And then teacher A goes on to say, 453 representatives. Does anyone else think there are a different number of representatives? Again, the teacher A acknowledges Tommy's response, and then teacher A also wants to let the other students have a chance of either agreeing or disagreeing with Tommy. In this case, all of the rest of the class agrees with Tommy, so in unison, most of the students would be saying something like no, or as no, there are no other different number of representatives. Teacher A goes on to say, perfect, good job scholars, that is correct. There are 453 representatives in the legislative branch. And then this is where teacher B jumps in, and teacher B says something along the lines of, all right, now that we know how many representatives we have, can someone share with the class as to why these representatives are important? Tyler raises his hand. Teacher B, yes, Tyler. Tyler, the legislative representatives are important because they make the laws we live by. After Tyler answers, teacher B will ask the class if they agree with Tyler. In this case, one student, Kayla, tells teacher B and the rest of the class, yes, I agree. I was going to say the same thing, meaning Kayla was going to answer, but Tyler got called on. But she also had the same idea as Tyler did. Teacher B, that's good to hear, Kayla. Are there any students who disagree? And then we hear no response. And teacher B says, okay, with that said, do we think it is important to know who has a hand in making laws for the United States? Jimmy raises his hand, and he gets called on, and Jimmy says, the legislative branch has the power to make laws that tell us what we can do and can't do with our lives. And then teacher B says, exactly, that is correct. And then we have another student, Jimin, who also raises his hand and gets called on, and he says, it is important for us to know who's in charge of making laws and ensure our desires and beliefs are representative in government. And there are definitely a lot more opportunities and chances for other students to raise their hands and share their thoughts and their beliefs as to why the legislative branch is important, and why it is important to know who are our representatives within this 20-minute discussion. So towards the end of the discussion, once we reach that 20-minute gap, teacher A or teacher B, we just chose to do teacher A for this script, would conclude the explanation portion by saying, these are some of the things that we should think about and realize the importance of as we continue to grow in knowledge. Some barriers that my partner and I came up with were that students may come to the conclusion they have to come up with a wrong answer or response when this may not be the case, and end up in a dead-end, halting thought production. Meaning, since it is an open discussion for the whole class, students are required to answer and share their thoughts and ideas about this topic. Some students may want to just say some random stuff to keep the conversation going, but that's not the case. We are also using resources like textbooks, even each other, to help each other out with answering these questions. Another barrier is that at home, parents may not inform their children, or they may also even be against their children learning about politics in school. But this is not just learning about politics. This topic is more so informing the students and having them be aware as to who their representatives are. And again, for those barriers, another solution is that not every single student is required to answer the questions. Since it is an open discussion, any student can jump in and share at any time. And then some of my metacognitive statements were mainly just around the idea that this is overall an open discussion for the whole class, where they can just give their inputs and insights about the topic. Visually, it can even be set up as a circle around the classroom where we go around and talk about this, or even just from the point of view of the desk. Another metacognitive statement that I had listed was that not every student may know the answer to a question, but that doesn't mean that they can exclude themselves from the discussion. They're always more than welcome to use their resources, such as their textbook or even the internet, to look up the questions. And with that being said, this concludes my portion of the explanation from the UDL lesson plan. Thank you.